right, good evening and welcome to the Thursday, March 3rd, 2022 regular meeting of the school committee. I would invite those who are here in the studio that would like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. All for tuning in. First item on the agenda is for public comment. I do not see any members of the public that would like to make public comment, but that would move us into recognitions if there are no public comments. Does anybody have any any recognitions? I wanted to make just one because I know this has been a big week for a lot of people in the district. And at our last meeting, as people know, we voted to allow the masks to come off this week, and just to want to recognize and thank all of our educators who made this transition for our kids and presented it what sounds like in a very positive way for kids to make the choices that felt right for them. So thank you to our teachers and educators and everybody who helped our kids transition. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Get us started with the student council report, Jessie.
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessie Ionelli. I'm a senior at Hopkinton High School. As you all know, this week was our first week unmasking once again at the high school, and I think it's gone pretty well. I've definitely seen more people opting to not wear a mask than I have in the past trials, but as far as I've seen, there haven't been any issues one way or another with judgment to those wearing or not wearing a mask, which is excellent. In news unrelated to mask policy, many of our winter teams have advanced to the state tournaments. Boys basketball unfortunately lost in the first round to Wellesley on Tuesday night, while girls basketball beat Malden last night, and boys hockey takes on their first playoff game tonight. The boys swim team did great at the state championship at BU last weekend, and Tess and Eve Weatherhead finished 3rd and 4th in the diving championship. Our track athletes also went to states last weekend, with Kate Powers placing 8th in shot put, and Sean Gomblowski, despite a hamstring injury, placing 6th in the high jump. Now their focus is on nationals, where Somia Karthikeyan, Kylie Locke, Emma DiMichele, Ellie Driscoll, Kira O'Connor, Kate Powers, Drew and Will Balabreski, Declan Mick, and Sean Gomblowski will all be competing in New York, which is exciting. Our ski team also raced in the championship on Tuesday at Wachusett. And last but certainly not least, Justin Sokol placed 5th at the All-State Wrestling Championship last weekend, becoming only the 6th Hopkinton wrestler in history to qualify for New England's, which is an amazing achievement. Also extremely exciting, the drama ensemble has been hard at work preparing for their winter production called 12 Angry Jurors, with performances on March 10th, 11th, and 12th. So tickets can be purchased online in advance. If you're able to come out and see the show while supporting our drama department, you definitely won't want to miss it. Our science fair students presented their projects on Wednesday, with Simran Kaur winning first place for her project titled Treating 2,4-D Exposed Planaria with Drug Supplement Interactions to Palliate Parkinson's Disease. I personally cannot tell you what half of those words mean, but clearly our science fair students are incredibly talented and working hard to complete projects that facilitate real-world solutions and applications, which is very impressive. And that's all I have for my update, but as always, if you have any questions, I'd love to answer.
Questions?
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah.
So much goodness. I love that it's science and drama and athletics, and it represents the student body really well. You know, that we're very well rounded.
Yeah, absolutely. So many opportunities.
Excellent, thank you.
Of course.
All right, so that brings us into our next report, which is our Social Emotional Learning Director, Ms. Burley. We are very excited to have you here. We've been eagerly awaiting the opportunity to have you in, so thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
I'm just going to pass this around. I made 6 copies for people, so hopefully there's enough.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you too. Thanks. So thank you for inviting me tonight to speak on the behalf of the district in social emotional learning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share our vision for social emotional learning moving forward. So at Hopkinton Public School, we support the implementation of social emotional learning, and we think of this through academic learning, building meaningful relationships, establishing collaborative partnerships, with our staff, our family, and our community. Our priority is to ensure students are supported academically, socially, emotionally, and physically, and that educators have the ability to connect, thank you, and deepen relationships with all of our students and each other. So social emotional learning is more important now than ever. This is one study, and hopefully everybody can see that clearly. This is a well-known study, so I chose to put this one. There's many more. And this talks about the advantages of what students experience with a control group. So basically, the students who are involved with cell programming and students who are not. So kids who were involved in programming, you see the 27% increase in academic performance, 57% for the skill development, 24% on social behaviors and decreases in levels of distress, 23% in improved attitudes, and 22% with fewer conduct problems. So to begin this work, we really think about social emotional learning, which can seem very much vague and ambiguous, can be conceptualized in different ways. So we ground ourselves in a definition, and this definition is from the Collaborative of Academic and Social Emotional Learning. It's a definition that really speaks to the process, so I'm just going to read the definition. So social emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply knowledge and skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals. Feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And part of our definition encompasses competencies. And those competencies, there's 5 of them: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and decision-making. And you can see the difference in the colors, because the self-awareness and self-management is something that we know happens interpersonally within ourselves. And then the social awareness and relationship skills is interpersonally, and decision-making is encompassed with all. And often when we apply the skills, we use all skills. We don't, sometimes if we're by ourselves, we're doing the more internal work, but when we're interacting with others, we're applying all skills at one time. So the skills within each competency are central to the learning process, and that's really the point I want to make here today, is that making meaning, thinking, feeling, and doing are all aspects of learning. So what's very relevant, especially this year with all of the complications we've had with racial reckonings and the work that we're moving toward with equity, is that we understand that SEL is a lever for equity. So I've been in situations before in my career where we would see SEL come in, and when we're in inequitable environments, SEL doesn't do too well. It struggles. So SEL really needs to be that lever for equity. It has to support equity work. So to do that, we have a little bit of a definition here, but the basis of it is the SEL skills do support those relationships and the learning that are needed to be able to reflect on personal and social identities, examine prejudice and biases, build on the cultural competency, promoting the inclusive learning environments that affirm strengths and experience for all individuals. And also for setting goals, that's actually one of the competencies, and being able to take action and improve on community and well-being. And some of this work dovetails very nicely with the work that Jen Sucre is doing with respecting human identities, which she's kicked off that program this year. And we continue to work on a couple other projects together. So again, as I mentioned, social emotional learning is about learning, and it's also tied into academics. So when we look at these academic, skills, we see SEL integrated into each one of them. So cognitive, we apply the cognitive skills, problem solving, setting goals, planning and organizing. Those are all part of self-management skills. When we look at social and interpersonal skills, navigating social situations, resolving conflicts, we would even add relationships with people that are different than ourselves. Like, all those pieces are part of social and interpersonal. Emotional is very much part of our self-awareness. So we can really see that social emotional skills are very tied into our learning process and how we learn. So what is our vision? So I'm new, and I came in with a vision, and Carol helped me to frame it and do a scope and sequence, because I've been here for 6 months and we hit the ground running. So our vision really is to deepen our SEL knowledge, because we know SEL exists in our schools. We do a really good job of it, but we're hoping to deepen it. So to do that, we deepen our knowledge with the skills and the attitudes that I'm talking about right now, and we'll provide adults and youth with the strategies and the tools to cultivate high-quality social, emotional, and academic learning that advances equity and excellence throughout the school system. And when I talk about high-quality social and emotional learning, what I mean is we may be advocating for SEL in our schools, and we may have an understanding of it, what it feels like, what it looks like associated with climate, but we really want it to be integrated deeper into our learning, into our academics, into the way kids problem solve. So when we say deepen, that's what we mean by deepen. So in this little diagram here, you see that SEL instruction in climate happens within the classroom. It also happens within the school, and we'd like to see those competencies presented in both places. And even eventually, when we have the bandwidth to do that, is to get in with the parents and actually do some work there. So we see the learning day continue into the home. So this is what we've done this year. This is our 4 focus areas. So the past few years, we've underscored like why SEL is important, what it does to create this foundation of safe in-person environments, caring relationships, mental well-being, engaging in instruction, and it's just overall that component for healthy development. So every moment that we have to be able to teach the SEL within the student experience, we want to take advantage of that. So this year, we've focused on 4 areas: school-wide SEL, classroom climate and academic integration, and adult social emotional learning. When we think about implementation of social emotional learning, we have a plan to implement based on phases and where schools are ready. So these 10 indicators of social emotional learning tell us where SEL lives in our schools. It lives within explicit instruction, integrated into academic instruction, youth voice and engagement, supportive schools, climates, focus on adult SEL, supportive discipline, continuum for integrated supports, which is also known as MTSS, multiple tiers of student support, authentic family partnerships, aligned community partnerships, and systems for continuous improvement. So this year we really were focusing on these 3 indicators, which is supportive classroom climates, adult SEL, and working on the integrated supports. And some of that is being done in collaboration with other directors within the departments, within the district departments. So focus area number 1 is school-wide SEL, and we think of this as creating a supportive staff environment that promotes adult SEL, well-being, and creates safe, healthy, welcoming, joyful environments for adults in service of students. We've started with a restorative justice training for our administrative staff, and that includes the district staff and the principals and their assistant principals. And we're moving toward early adopter training for those who are interested in the schools. And we started that with Suffolk University. We've also started going into meeting with each principal and walking them through the 10 indicators of implementation and having them identify what lives in their building, what they want to continue doing, what would they like to improve on. And of course, what comes out of that now, which might not have come out of it before, is you have these programs, are they being successful? Is the purpose of these programs really meeting the needs of what you intended them to do? So that's really, that's a new way of looking at social emotional learning. We've created cell leadership teams in some of the schools or aligned to existing teams where possible. And our plan is to move into looking at data and engaging in walkthroughs and debrief protocols within the schools. Our second focus area is classrooms. And we kind of hit the ground running with this, where I was able to get into the schools and do a lot of professional development with the adult staff. And we focused on what we call the cell signature practices. And it's basically a nice framing for SEL where we do activities for inclusion. So those could look like a restorative justice circle. They could look like a morning meeting circle or responsive classroom circle, because there's a lot of different programming that exists in the district. So just really starting to engage, welcome students in, and participate in that inclusive activity. The engaging practices happen throughout the lessons, throughout the days, where kids can get up and move, keep themselves active and engaged. And some kids just need to move, so that's that opportunity just to make it explicit. And then our optimistic closures, which we found that this is an area where people had that aha moment. They were like, wow, we're not doing that as much as we could. Give us some strategies for that. And that was a brilliant time for them to come up with their, like, maybe we can add some reflective stems for the students and maybe for ourselves in our own adult meetings. And so that might look like something like, how do we take the work that we've currently learned and move that forward into our own day or into our own practice. So that's something that I think really stuck with adults, and I think that they're probably going to start using these practices within their own adult meetings and structures. I know we've started doing that in some of our administrative meetings, and the principals actually are like, please keep doing that, so that's a good thing. Our third area of focus, academic integration. So this is really just scratching the surface. There's a lot of work that we can do here. So our first step is really to look at what exists at Tier 1. So we've looked at our multiple tiers of student support. We're considering, what do all schools want to do consistently within their buildings across the district. So we're kind of doing a needs assessment. I've started working with the help of Jen Parson, working with Deb Gorman on the health curriculum and looking at the scope and sequence, because a lot of social emotional learning lessons integrate into health. So that's one area that we're really focusing on. And then the next area is really just getting as many tools and strategies out to teachers that we can get them as soon as possible. So I've created a website where they can go on, access it, and go into their content area and pull down resources and tools right away. And the last area is adult SEL. So we've done a ton of professional development. We put out a wellness survey when we heard that the staff was feeling overwhelmed because of the COVID 2-year difficult times. We heard from the staff. We used that data to then go to the next step and put in an executive functioning course where, our teachers are pretty amazing in the sense that they, in one breath will say they're overwhelmed, but in the next breath they'll be totally 100% committed, and they will take the next step and the next mile. And so that's what really motivated me, because I wanted to give them something that they could really use. And what I was hearing was kids needed more around executive functioning skills. They lost 2 years possibly of socialization. So what can we do to build up their task orientation, their timing, their organization, their management skills? So we got that to them quick, and they were very, very pleased with that. So we'll continue our PD series, which is adult cell, signature practices, and educator resilience throughout the rest of this year. So overall, our district strategy work is moving forward quickly. So that's a good thing. Where we've been, as you see on the left-hand side, the Vision College Career, there's been PBIS academies that have been started in our elementary schools. There's been a lot of work done on the Tier 3 student empower programs and START programs. They hired me. And then we get into where we are now currently, and I just kind of went over those slides with you. And then where we're headed is more to think about a data-driven approach for MTSS, making sure that we can blend in existing things that are happening, like our PBIS structures come in and fold into the MTSS structure, that we are thinking about a district climate team, because we realize that there might be a little bit of a gap there, Restorative practices should be something that everybody has in their toolkit. Student support centers, in some of the schools that can take those on, some do have them already, and maybe strengthening how they operate or the process for which they work with students. Professional development, standards, I'd really love to get standards out there. And then, as always, this cross-district collaboration, so we have some real strength in the district, and so SEL lives everywhere, it's like connective tissue, so sometimes it's hard to lasso it. But what I do know is that we can build real strong, productive relationships with the people that we already have that are already doing good work, and it's just going to strengthen our work as a district. So what's next? Vision for the MTSS, you've kind of heard me say a couple things, climate team, alignment, collaboration, and then with the schools, we're trying to deepen some of the work. I'm doing more coaching, direct coaching and consultation so when something comes up and people are struggling with that, I'll go in and meet with teachers. Like today, I met with a group of 8th grade teachers. School leadership teams, I'll step into that work as well. I know there's some discussions around advisory for middle school, so looking at like what does that curriculum look like Jen Sucra and I are working collaboratively with the middle school on kind of how that can happen together. And then the student success at the high school, we're looking at that program as well. So that's it for the presentation for today, and I'm welcome to hear any conversations or questions you might have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Start
Yeah,
with questions?
yeah,
Go
I'll
ahead.
start from this side, I guess, but again, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. I think it's a really critical role, given what students and faculty have been through the last couple of years. I'm sure you see the same. I'd love to hear more about your background, Ms. Burley, since we're just meeting you for the first time. I'm sure we were told before, but if you would like to introduce
Okay.
yourself to the community, where you came from, and
Sure.
that type of thing too. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I've been in education for probably 18 or 19 years. I've been a teacher. I went into high need schools that really interest me, so I found my way right out of grad school going into Fall River. I went into being a school psychologist. I spent some time there in turnaround schools and learned fast on the ground what that looked like. And then from there I went for a master's program for applied developmental psychology at Boston College and learned I really loved the developmental pieces of how kids develop, and the social piece was really critical in their development. And so from there I stayed in Fall River for about 5 or 6 years, and then I went on to Boston. They hired me on as the social emotional learning director for Boston. And SEL is funny because everybody doesn't really know where it fits. So even in Boston, when I came on, they're like, isn't this like behavioral health, or isn't this SEL? Like, where are we going to put this? So I landed in the Department of Academics for SEL and instruction, and was able to create the competencies and the skills. And so even though I have that mental health lens, I would like to say that it's very important to me. But also, it's important that we do Tier 1 well. And what I've learned through the districts that I've been in, that Tier 1 is often in the area of social emotional learning and behavior is lacking. So we've really got to bolster that Tier 1, and that's the work that I'm really interested in doing here. But I'm also a resource for the Tier 2 and Tier 3.
Excellent. Great.
Sure, thanks so much. It was
You're welcome.
really informative, and it is just the tonic we all need. You say that what's next for us is the district climate team, which I know we've talked about in our bullying subcommittee,
Yes.
because I think we said we had one.
Well, I think we've said that we've always had that in the plan,
Right.
but I don't necessarily know that we had a high-functioning district climate team.
Okay.
So the work that we started to do, I think, this year was to really put something together that would be far more comprehensive than just a line in a bullying report.
Right, right. And what is that going to look like, the district climate team?
Well, my vision for it, but of course, we all talk, we all share our visions together in the district. We like to listen to each other. What I hope to see is a lot of collaboration. Is the first thing, the key, and having different voices and people at the table. I'd like to eventually look at data, so we can have a district-wide data, school-level data, so then we can make some more informed decisions. What we've noticed right away, because we did start doing some work with the administrative team, is that there's buckets of work that people see climate within. So we see some of the equity work, we see some of the behavioral orientation work in that vision. So it's really gonna call us to work together, to come up with a vision that meets the needs of all schools. And I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, thank you.
I think that dialogue's been pretty rich. You know, we've even talked about the transitions, because our kids make such frequent transitions that the acclimation period as they move from one building to another is sometimes, it's difficult. I mean, for some kids, it'll be January before they feel fully comfortable in a building. And then interestingly, in 18 months, they're leaving that building, you know, so tricky. But we've had a lot of good dialogue, I think, about it so far, but there's still work to do in thinking about what a district climate team would be.
It's great to meet you.
You too.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all this. We've heard so much about your work, and the things that excite me about this are just that district lens that we haven't had, because I think we've done so much in pockets, and I love that you're looking to leverage our in-house strengths and then fill in the gaps and figure out where those are. So I'm really excited about the lens and hopefully getting it at a continuous, coherent approach that kids can learn early and then just build on as they go with the same language and the same approach. So I'm excited about that. I guess my question is, can you talk more about how you measure? I mean, I'm really excited that we're going to measure like how effective things are and where we have those gaps. What kind of measurements? How do you get at this exactly?
Thanks for that question. Continuous improvement is really important to me. It's like a passion I have. So when we think about programs in themselves, sometimes they develop with no core process, right? And we're not connecting or collecting data that we need. So the first thing is really to look at the program we have and make sure we're capturing the data that we need to effectively decide whether or not there's improvements being made. So that's the first thing. The second is that within our schools, I really count on with social emotional learning walkthroughs, because we can see the practice, we can get into the classroom, and it's really not evaluative. It's about recognizing best practices, things that are working, showcasing, elevating. That's really that's a different type of debriefing and data process that we would use. But when we look at student level data, we want to see gains. So over time, the transitions do play a major piece of it because we're changing schools. But if we get the language piece down, like you mentioned, right, common language, we can measure that a little bit more successfully, right? So there's multiple data sets. We should always be looking at more than one data set. You know, we have vocal data. We have our regular MCAS academic data. So now if we come in with some more data that goes a little deeper around student skills, we'll know what to target. Classroom teachers will be able to get a heat map that says my kids need to work on more self-management strategies, and they can work on that. So there's a lot of things coming out in the field, new ways of measuring SEL, but what I've heard and what I've actually seen is that SEL skills are not so much driven down to the individual student. It's more about what types of programmings and supports and academic interventions can we provide. So it's not so much that this child is going to be an SEL kid or whatever, categorized because of data. What would happen is we would look at the deficits or the needs or the growth areas, and we'd start providing those through either academic instruction, through programming, and through supports. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I would love to talk to you about it later, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no, well, as it unfolds, I'm sure we'll hear more.
Yes.
So
Yes.
good luck with that.
So thank you for coming in. I think this is really great because I think one of the things that we often talk about is kids being resilient, but it's an implicit resilience, and that implicit resilience can take them only so far, right? And at some point, if they're having struggles, there's skills that they need, and I'm really excited to see this kind of holistic approach across the different schools to give them those skills so that when they do hit those moments, they have things to fall back on, right? Instead of just kind of this implicit ability. One question I have is, and maybe I missed it in like kind of looking through the PowerPoints, but you were discussing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of stages here, but I don't see really a clear definition of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Yeah,
And so I was hoping you could at least kind of broadly
absolutely.
define what the tiers are.
Yes, yes. And just to, and I'll probably explain this as well. So when we talk about multiple tiers of systems of support for students, basically what will happen is we look at what programs exist in each school and what it is those programs do. So let's say tier 1 would be the signature practices that we'd want all classrooms to do, all teachers to do. And we'd look at that through measurement of walkthroughs and whether or not they were happening. That's a tier 1 strategy that we'd want the district to do. When we go into a school, they may have additional strategies that they would add into their map of MTSS or map of tier 1 supports. When we get up to tier 2, that's usually where there's a gap in a lot of schools, I'll just say that. So what happens is people will put in a check-in, check-out system or some type of small group interventions. And to do that, you have to have the resources and supports to put all those things in place. So tier 2 is an area where we're still building out. So those are like, either you can do a small group intervention in your classroom or something that's some sort of pull-out where you're really drilling into a skill. Tier 3 is your students who really need that individualized support. Now what happens is kids can access different tiers based on different needs. So what that means is if I have academic needs and I need a tier 2 intervention, but behaviorally I need a tier 3 intervention, that you get what you need. It's not so much that you're locked into a specific intervention. So that's the goal, and we're working on that right now. I'm working very closely with Karen Zaleski, who we've designed the district map, and now we're going into the schools and having them confirm their map. And then the other part is really helping to strengthen those individual pieces that they have in their map and whether or not they're functioning efficiently. So that's kind of, does that make sense?
No, thank you very much. No, as in,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think that enriches what you just put in here because it really, I mean, the targeted interventions, the small group interventions are definitely what you need
Yes.
to make sure every kid ends up in a good place. So
Yes.
that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, want to echo what everybody else said without repeating it, but really also just to thank you for bringing a lens of hope into the district. It has felt just in the past 2 years like the amount of need that we're seeing across the board is growing, even from before the pandemic, really, quite honestly. But to offer hope that we're not just going to be catching kids that have already hit crisis, but to be able to build competencies and get kids to a hopefully a preventative place as well. So
Yes, thank
much
you.
appreciated.
Thank you.
And I have heard fabulous things about the things that you have been doing already in the district. So that's a fabulous resource for all of our educators. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And just to, one of the last thing I will say is you just mentioned about resiliency, and one kind of unknown factor about SEL is that the skills that we learn, we apply every day, and they shift and they change. So that's the work, right? It's like when I am in the grocery store, what skills am I using? When I'm talking to my daughter, what skills am I using? And so when people realize that those skills are never completely learned, they're constantly being challenged, that's the beauty of saying, like, okay, there's an opportunity to teach and there's hope. It's not just like you're never going to learn them. Like, you've just got to keep practicing them. So it's the hope.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you. Look forward to all the things to look at ahead.
Okay, thanks.
So that brings us into our financial report.
Okay.
Into our financial report, Susan. Do you need this screen?
Just takes a little while. It's bigger. Helpful for everyone to see. So thank you. This is the financial report through the end of the month of February. At this time, still trying to make it a little bit bigger.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
As much for me as it is for you. We are running a slight positive variance now, which is good to see. And this is what happens as we approach, we're kind of at the mid-year and heading towards the end of the year. The departments are able to identify monies that may or may not get spent, positions that we're having difficulty hiring or we will not be hiring. And so we're starting to see that flip a little bit in the payroll variance, for instance. So the positions reduced has grown, and some of the positions are the driver. We always have some money in case we need to hire a driver for special education. We will not hire summer help for custodians when school gets out, and we haven't done that in a few years, mostly because of COVID, and will continue at least through the end of this year. We also have not been able to hire crossing guards, which is unfortunate. So I've put that right now as a position unhired, but we are still advertising. Anybody out there? But so these are the things that are starting to flip and be more well-defined. We've talked in the past about the fact that the special ed transportation, there was no in-district transportation provided. We've also had a budget for homeless transportation, which over the past few years prior to the pandemic had been growing. And at this point in time, we do not have any homeless students that we are transporting. So I've taken most of that and showing that as being unspent. Things can happen still, so I left a little in there as a potential that we would still be spending it. So you can see where some of this expense variance is starting to get clearer, which all in all has led to the positive variance that we are looking at now. As we talked about in the last school committee meeting, Dr. Kavanaugh spoke about the Green Communities Grant Award. As we are doing those and we are looking at projects, we're always doing audits of what are the potential projects, and it's the ones that have the most energy reduction that we know will be funded, and those are the ones that are submitted. So one of the projects that was not submitted, but we may begin to do some work on using the building use, is doing more controls at the high school. The last Green Communities and funding, we did some controls work at the middle school, and so now we're moving over to the high school. So that's a project. The more we can get these projects done and underway, the more control we can get over our utilities and continue to try to bring those down, which has a benefit for future budgets. So we'll continue to work through on that as well. So that's something else that is also reflected.
Have we seen a realization of the lowering of utility costs in the middle school with the controls? Like, did we see changes?
Well, so the difficulty with that is while we have control, we've had them open full blast.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So when
Yes.
when we get out of this pandemic and we're able to control and put our set points at what would be considered a more normal range, I think we'll start to see those costs coming down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so just having that control is beneficial. So any questions?
Yes. You said that we don't have any in-district sped transportation right now. Does that mean that that's because all of our kids are riding the bus and going with their parents?
So what we have offered is parent reimbursement.
Okay.
Yes, so parents and some students have been able to transition to the bus, which has been great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so if if they have a team meeting and it's decided that the student is able to access using the bus, there have been students that have transitioned. already made arrangements, so we have transportation for next year with another vendor.
Oh, that's good.
Very good.
Very good to hear.
It's been a struggle.
Thank you.
That brings us down. Any questions before we? Okay. Then that brings us into Dr. Kavanaugh, into the superintendent's report.
Let's see, look at that.
Huh.
It's amazing.
What a fun PowerPoint template.
I know you have the best templates.
There we go. Okay, so the superintendent's report for March 3rd, 2022. This whole report offers you not a lot of information, but an awful lot of celebration of students and student work. So that's what I've done. And really, it started with the display that you see on the screen right now. At the high school, Colleen Janino, the subject matter leader for art, has put together all of these truly amazing portraits, and they are all done through embroidery. It was fabulous, so I thought, all right, I'll just kind of run with that portrait theme. And you can see the one over on the left-hand side is actually wearing a mask in the portrait. They're phenomenal if you could see them all together. And this is, Christine Enos had come to me and said that her kids were doing something called the Memory Project. And what happens is kids in other countries, kids who are in need, will send you a picture of themselves through email, and then our students actually create those portraits of those children based on the pictures that they've sent. So some of the high school artists have created those pictures of Nigerian children, and they will send them back to the kids in Nigeria.
Really neat.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. And prior to coming here tonight, Mrs. Parson and I were able to stop at the closing evening of the senior honors, there's really the honors exhibition, and just some more portrait there. So we look at the quality of that artwork. It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. I was glad that we managed to squeeze that in tonight because it's phenomenal. All right, so just some celebration of musical talent. I know that it's very difficult to see that, but I think we have 7 kids who have qualified for the 2022 Junior District Festival in orchestra, 7 in chorus, and 4 in band. So those are all of the students right there that Mr. Hay was able to send those out to us today. So that's really great news for our district as well. What you see here are the kids who are qualifying for Regional Science Fair, and you can see the huge number of them. And I think Kristen Murphy, the teacher in the lower left, was also Teacher of the Week, or Teacher of the Month, I think. The kids have actually started something, Teacher of the Month, I think. And she's our first one.
Very
Ever. Yes, so it's really nice. Business Professionals of America and Robotics, you'll be approving trips tonight for them, and so Mr. Scott just wanted to share these words from the kids, and I will actually read through these. The first one is traveling to Business Professionals of America National Conference this year in Dallas. Would be such a meaningful experience. I've competed in BPA for my high school years, and as a senior, it would feel like the completion of that journey. A lot of us have spent significant amounts of time creating our projects and studying for exams to do well at SLC, and going to national would be taking it to the next level. As a BPA state officer, I also feel like being at NLC would be rewarding, as I've worked for the last year to help organize the state leadership conference. The competition, memories, learning experiences, and hard work would make National Learning Leadership Conference a valuable time for everyone in BPA. And in terms of VEX Robotics, a student tells us that VEX Robotics has provided me and many other students a platform to tinker and bring ideas to life while enjoying the pursuit of competition and sportsmanship. I've been able to hone in and develop my programming and documenting skills and build relationship with driven, passionate teammates. For the last 2 years, the World Championship has been virtual, and although we've been very grateful for the opportunity, it truly hasn't been the same kind of experience as getting hands-on in the field. Especially as a senior, with the competition being in person this year, it would be amazing to compete live and get a chance to apply our skills. And a mom sent this off to Mr. Scott last week, which I also thought was a really lovely compliment to a lot of what goes on in our D wing in terms of robotics and BPA and art and music. But this mom says, this academic year in the popular VEX robotic program, the Patricia Mentors, my son is participating. During the first competition, he and his team did not have a working robot. In the second competition, they had a working bot, but little or no practice. In their third competition, they have both and started winning awards. I closely saw their progressive growth, persistence, engineering skills, and camaraderie, and I have nothing but appreciation for these programs, which I also thought was a really nice tribute to what happens there. Finally, the Elmwood School had a family reach out to one of the teachers to say that her family is Ukrainian, and there are women who are having babies and in bomb shelters, and they do not have access to diapers or wipes or clothing or blankets or those things. So the Elmwood School put this out, and the response from this community has been so amazing that I was there today, and really it's like something that would get you teary to see how many donations. And this family says, we can make sure that they get to Ukraine. You just need to get us the diapers and the wipes and all of those things. And that it's just soared. It's been amazing. This happened yesterday. So we've been talking all year about being part of Black Print Consulting, and they've been doing a whole lot of work with the district and, cultural proficiency and diversity and equity and looking at, biases in curriculum and all of that. And so we had our sort of in-person visit yesterday. So you can see the two women who came to visit us from Black Print. One is Sophia Boyer and the other one is Lisette Castillo. They are amazing women. They were just so, I thought, like warm and easy to open up to. And they're not women that we had worked with in consulting virtually with them. So it was really nice to have them here in the district. They visited classrooms at the high school, the middle school, and at the Marathon School. And what we did with them was we started out with a whole set of criteria of what cultural proficiency looks like, and then we had to pick two things that we would look for as we went through the classrooms. And the one on the left was, what does a classroom sort of physically look like? What are the aesthetics? What do you see hanging on the wall? Are people using the walls as an opportunity to teach, to grow cultural proficiency, all of that? And then the second one was, do you see that classrooms are built on cooperative culture or competitive culture? And I will say that by the time those ladies left us, they were here from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock yesterday. The lovely words that they had for this community, I'm telling you, Mrs. Carver, and I don't want to divulge her secret, but she said as they were kind of debriefing with us at the end, she thought that she could cry. Like she said, they didn't even come to my school, but there's something so amazing that happens in Hopkinton. They just kept underscoring how unusual a community that we are. I think they saw an awful lot of environmental stuff. One of them kept just saying, I can't believe when I go into English classes the kinds of texts I'm seeing. Those are things that you would be seeing freshman year in college, and they really reflect your student body. And I think they challenge kids' thinking, and I think they build community. The other woman who, none of us perhaps would have known it because we're not fluent Spanish speakers, but they were in a Spanish classroom where, obviously everyone's speaking in the target language, but what was really going on in that Spanish classroom was like a science lesson. And those kids, the engagement, but it really kind of, I think, spoke to kids who have those interests even while they're in another discipline. I could ramble on forever about this, but I think too that when we looked at a lot of the cooperative culture, kids were really working together. I happened to be in Colleen Cormier's classroom for a little bit, and she's the subject matter leader at the high school for social studies, and she was looking at sort of political parties in Germany at the rise and fall of Hitler, and she had the kids. They all had particular scenarios, like you could be a person who had 5 children, or you could be a person who, was an academic, or you could be, and you had to decide which one of those political parties you would be interested in belonging to based on, and then make predictions about whether those parties would be able to endure, certain things that would have happened in the 1930s and 1940s, and those kids were like, up and moving and talking and arguing and debating, and it was really an incredible, like, it's rare to see that kind of, like, just excellence in a classroom. One of the women who, when she was leaving, she said, I paid for my daughter to go to a very elite private school in Vermont, and it cost me $67,000 a year, and this is free and if not better. So I thought, wow, that was really something. Anyway, so that was something I think that made all of our adults super proud this week, and it should. So just good news today. Nothing else.
That's good.
Questions?
That's great. I love that update, and I love that it was so moving for you. It says a lot. Thank you.
Nice. Any other questions?
I'm just curious, are we gonna stop having COVID updates at all during like the upcoming months, or what's the plan in terms of COVID and how it's progressing? And you know, right now everything's going well, so
Yes.
but
You mean here in our meetings?
right.
I
the-
would
the
be
usual
happy to continue to do that, if it's the desire of the committee. I think when I did my DESI report for the last 2 weeks, I think we had 8 cases.
Okay.
So, I
Thank
mean,
you.
that feels fabulous.
That feels
Yeah.
really great, yeah.
Out of the 4,000 students, you mean, or in the high school alone, or the 8?
No, out of
Yeah,
the
the whole-
entire district.
Yeah,
It's not much to talk about then.
well,
thank
yes,
goodness.
but good
Well,
news numbers.
Yeah,
would,
okay.
you know,
I would say good news is
True.
Yeah.
welcome.
yes.
I know that this has been looking at, and I didn't see what came out for today from the state, but I know last week, the data that came out on Hopkinton was really excellent. I had run into Sean and he seemed very pleased. Have you had feedback from building principals or in general, anybody, I guess, that about how the mask optional has gone?
Sure. We actually, all 5 of them and I met today. We had talked about it a little bit. It seems like at the high school, people were far quicker to remove their masks because you'd already done it one time, so. But I think on Monday, probably 80% of our elementary school kids were all in wearing masks. And then little by little over the week, you've seen that number, that percentage trickle down and down and down and down. And now we're probably at like 40%. Yeah, so it's a whole lot lower. I think people are kind of getting there. You know, it's a huge transition. I mean, as you said.
Well, I think that's more what I'm
Yeah.
thinking about is not just how many are or not, but how are kids feeling? What is the mood?
Yeah,
guess
I think that kids are so funny. They're almost business as usual. You know, they're more about ELA and recess than they are about thinking about like the trauma of removing a mask when they're little. You know. Yeah.
Okay.
Has our absenteeism been typical, like just normal?
I think typical. Yeah.
And the buses have been typical, that has been
Do you know anything about
no
ridership?
change in the
Yeah,
function?
no, we really didn't get much, yeah.
Good uneventful week then. All right. Then that, if there are no other questions. Brings me into the school committee chair report. Payroll warrant S22018 and warrant 22-031 have been approved. Copy of the warrants are included in your packet. Did people have liaison reports? I know that with break, maybe things were a little bit.
I had a question because
Yes.
I had the Marathon Fund Committee meeting 2 nights ago. And how are the different scholarships advertised to seniors? I don't know because I don't have a high school.
Yep.
There's a high schooler.
Yeah. How do you find out what's available?
Yeah,
Is
I
there
think
a portal?
there is on Naviance, which is a website we use to find colleges and stuff. There's a bunch of scholarships on there, and they also, guidance includes them in the student memo that's sent out weekly as well.
Okay.
So at least that's how I've been finding them. But
So is the Marathon Fund scholarship there? Or I'm just asking for practical reasons because
believe
we
so.
don't know on the
I think
Marathon
so.
Fund
I
Committee.
think I've seen that in the student memo as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Probably look. Give us the word over there, Jessie. Thank you.
Good question. Anybody else? Liaison? Okay. That brings us then into new business item A, which is the Hopkinton High School intent to travel. I'm assuming you're taking that?
Well, I believe that this has been a long and sordid tale. They were going to go abroad, then they decided not to go abroad, then they thought, oh, we could take a domestic trip to national parks. But what we learned from Ms. Breen today is that she just doesn't feel like she's going to have enough participation from kids. It just isn't enough interest to go. So she is not here with us tonight, and so we can just
Okay.
leave
Yep.
that agenda
Okay.
item alone.
Okay. Then that brings us down into new business item B, which is the mid-year check-in of the school committee norms. They're in the packet. Sorry, it takes me a little bit to scroll down. I know we had worked at length going over these this summer, and we had suggestion from Joe, thank you for bringing these back to review. Are there particular, in terms of, and I don't want to structure this in a way that's not helpful to everybody else, so I came in with the norms with an open thought of, are there particular pieces that we want to pull out to discuss tonight, or that we want to think about? Are there norms that people feel like that are here in the document merit kind of a highlighting of discussion? Let's start.
I'll start since I brought it up.
Great.
I just, again, I really like these norms, much better than the old ones, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple that I can't open it right now, but a couple that stand out. The one about welcoming different viewpoints, I think it's towards the end, maybe somebody has it up, is helpful. I find it helpful to look at once in a while, because I think if we each take an honest look at it, we can see it different ways each time we read through. And I don't think these are the types of things that are laws or there's penalties for not applying them or things like that, but they're useful as a guide for each of us to think about on our own. So I'm glad that we had a mid-year checkpoint.
I agree with the helpfulness of looking at them for intentionality and to kind of bring them back. I agree, we had great discussion, what feels like forever ago over the summer, but it really, we put a lot of thought into this and came out with what felt like an improvement over the document we had the year before.
As I looked at it, I don't really have anything I would propose changing or anything, so, yeah, no.
Okay, so are there others that want to?
I do wonder if, now, is this a good agenda topic I wonder if now that we're back to in-person meetings, we can, not now, but at some future point, think about practices on public comment now that we're back to in-person, you know?
I actually would like to ask if we should review that policy, because I think, I don't think the policy actually addresses remote meetings and public comment, and I think we adopted, well, I think last year I adopted, an approach, but we were charting a new course, like we hadn't been remote before, so, and I know that particular policy has a ton of case law that dictates what can go in there. It's a very lawyer, intensive policy because of issues that have happened with open meeting law and so forth. So I know that we have to get the lawyers involved if we open it up, but I feel like it needs some kind of a committee decision on how we handle remote meetings and public comment. And then the community will understand better how to engage. I mean, it just seems like something that would be helpful. Hopefully we don't have to ever go back to that.
I think we're all hoping that for sure. So maybe to pass that to the policy committee, I feel like we pass a lot back to you guys.
Or
but,
future agenda item or
but
something.
as a future agenda item, I don't mean, here on the spot, to consider.
I agree. I think it'd be nice to talk about the public comment and the use of discernment, when trying to decide.
Yeah. So I think we can codify that in our policy and kind of look forward to, look ahead. Best practices.
Yeah. It's kind of a very odd thing, right? Because public comment in real life, we don't get to control it, right? Whoever happens to be here and gets called up says whatever they're going to say. So it's kind of interesting to think about curating public comment. And yeah, I agree. I think we do probably, when we talk about this with school committee, we probably want the lawyer kind of understanding of, you know, when are we crossing a line if we curate, right?
Okay, so we'll leave that to the policy committee to bring back when you feel like you have that ready for. Are there anything else that people, as we were reading through the norms, wanted to pull out before we move on?
I just think it's good for us to return to them and do a mid-year review.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
Yeah.
I also think, to Joe's point about the welcoming a diversity of opinions, even though there have been times when we have been intense in our opinions, I think it is a strength that we represent our community with not always having all the same views. And
Yeah,
I
I still
appreciate
think in our
that.
public meetings, we've been a model for civil discussion, so, yeah, thank you.
I would actually disagree with that.
Oh,
And I really appreciated the offer of a consultant to come and speak with us individually and come up with kind of general tasks that we can do as a school committee to strengthen the dialogue. Because yes, I believe there have been moments where civility has not really reigned. And so I would like to get us back to the point where that is a standard thing.
team building.
Yeah, pretty much.
And you mentioned that you were reaching out to the fellow that Carol had recommended. Have you had any success?
I did actually. I had a conversation with him. He has done years ago, well before I think any of us were here. I mean, probably in town, but not here on the committee. Some work and is familiar with our district. His name is Tony Bent. He has had both roles of a superintendent and a school committee, and he does consultancy. His approach is to talk with us each, would be to talk with each member individually to kind of hear where our thoughts, our priorities, or any concerns that people have, and then to try to bring us together as a team. And,
And are we setting a date yet, or is this all still?
I would love to set a date if people are interested in going forward with that, and
Does he have references?
he has loads of references.
We want to see his references.
I
Right
know that
here.
you are both familiar with him as well.
Yeah.
You know him far better than what I know of him.
We do. He also runs the Assistant Superintendent Leadership Group, and so I was with him in that group for a couple of years, and now you've been with him for a few years there too.
Yes.
Yeah, he does, I think he's a good presenter.
He does an excellent job, and he actually did come and do work with the Milford School Committee, where I sit as a member, for some similar reasons, looking to understand our roles better, and
Okay.
part of why we chose him was because he had the dual roles,
Okay, so
superintendent
he's got,
and school committee
he's
member.
got intervention experience.
He, absolutely.
Okay.
And one thing, he always talks about leading with the heart. He's just such a super intelligent man, but he's academically intelligent and he's emotionally intelligent, and he really understands people. So I thought he did a great job for us.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping, I think airing emotions is good, but it doesn't lead us to resolution. So having somebody who can help us, come up with steps and ways to get to kind of a more resolved state would be really great.
So if there is consensus, I will reach out to see what his availability and people on the committee to check with your availability to find a mutually workable date.
I'm 1,000% behind it. I think it would be great. I really wanted to do team building last year. I think it's always good. And given the pressures that we've been under, last year we welcomed 2 new members in the middle of a pandemic, and we met so much. We were just, there was a lot of pressure. And then last year I thought I couldn't get any more pressure. And then this year we have more pressure than ever. There was more pressure because I think, not only is there pandemic fatigue, but we're also trying to support the superintendent and our staff and our students in recovering and sort of re-emerging. And it's just been difficult. So I thought we needed it last year, and this year I think we, especially any team, would need it. And I will be very thrilled and encourage all of us to do it. I think it'd be great. I like that he does one-on-one too, and that it gives us a chance to actually have a dialogue with him.
Right, and that then if each person has the opportunity to have that discussion, there might be things that people want to share that they wouldn't want to say. I wouldn't want to step into the wrong, way of trying to do this. Just the five of us. I think somebody who can help build team and community would be great.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge school committees have to that is the restrictions that we are as a public body. And I think this is a way to achieve it while adhering to the requirements of public open meetings and things like that. That's really what this is about. Yeah. So I just want to make sure people understand it's really a technical issue of how you get a team to be able to talk to each other, given that there's restrictions on school committee members talking to each other in between meetings.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a good way to do that.
And to echo what Amanda said, I mean, not only is the pandemic, but then you also take into account that we've all worked a full day. And we come here already tired and already kind of worn out. And then we're dealing with very stressful topics. And so, once again, there's a lot of skill that I would love to have in my back pocket for moments,
I want to gain skill in reading 200 emails in 3 days. That's really, I think that's such a huge part of what we do.
Oh, yes, we do. Yes.
And it has such an impact on our lives and our thinking. And so perhaps there's a way to bring that into the conversation as a group. I think the individual things are okay, but we have to work as a group.
Yes,
Yes.
and I agree. To keep our individual collective strengths, but to bring them together to channel forward. All right, then I will be in touch on scheduling offline.
So will you be looking at a weekend maybe?
Well,
I mean, this kind of work is hard to do at the end of the
I was
workday,
thinking a
so-
weekend would be better for me personally. What do you?
Why don't we just take it offline and figure it out,
Yep.
scheduling over email or something? Or, I wouldn't be able to say right now because I wasn't prepared to have the conversation. So
Fair enough.
Yep.
Okay. That brings us then down into item C, which is the B paraprofessional at the school committee, preschool.
Okay, so before I launch into that, I want to let you know that Mrs. Parsons just looked to see if Marathon Fund was actually in the student memo. And it was.
Oh, thank you.
But something even more exciting about that, we should have gone back to recognitions, is that Jess Ionelli is Student of the Month at the high school.
Oh,
We didn't know that.
Thank you.
So there we go. Now we can go.
Thank you for that.
That's great. Okay, so a B paraprofessional for the preschool. So this came from Dr. Zaleski, and she is looking for a .9 FTE because the paraprofessionals who work in the preschool work at .9. And she is looking for that person to start pretty immediately because we do have a student who's going to turn 3 and qualify for preschool and has some medical needs. So we are looking for you to approve that. And I think that she indicates that this will be paid for out of the IDEA grant.
Questions or?
sounds like it's needed.
Yeah. Is there a motion then?
I make a motion to approve a .9 FTE B paraprofessional for preschool and fiscal year 22.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Meg, a second by Leah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that carries.
I just want to say I appreciate that Dr. Zaleski almost always comes forward with a request and a funding source.
Yes.
She
Yes.
is really, really exceptional at explaining where the money will come from, so I really appreciate that.
That's great. There's another one there I see.
Oh, yes. they're
For Hopkins.
stacked up here. So for the Hopkins School, and I think in my last superintendent report, we had 10 students who had qualified for special education services since the start of the school year. And there were, I think, 15 additional students that were kind of in the queue waiting to be tested. And so Mrs. Bolello and Dr. Zaleski are seeking a 1.0 moderate learning specialist for the Hopkins School. This year, it will be paid out of the 240 grant. At some point, that, because it would be a regular teaching position, it would have to be absorbed into the budget. But when we add 10 kids, what we're really doing is like pretty much adding a special education liaison's caseload. And those numbers are getting high, and we want to make sure that there are classrooms where we are enrolling our kids who have special needs, who are, getting the support from a moderate special educator.
And
So-
just to clarify, this is to cover the 10 children we were talking about the last meeting.
That is correct, yes, and potentially more, so we don't know how many of those 15 will qualify, but, obviously some will.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve a 1.0 FTE moderate learning specialist for Hopkins.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you to Dr. Zaleski for that as well. And that brings us to the high school.
Okay, so this one, there is a person at the high school now who is .6 in special education, and that person is running a program where the kids have some, I guess I would call them sort of intensive or behavioral needs. And so the teacher is there at .6, but it gets very tricky because if a student has a need when that person is not in the room during that, the .6 day, we're kind of struggling with how do we assist those kids, and it gets very hard to kind of piecemeal those positions together. And so Mr. Bishop and Dr. Zaleski are looking for the additional .4 to ensure that those kids are getting, what they need academically and what they need in terms of, behavioral needs, so that they are able to access curriculum as fully as possible. And they're kids that we want to ensure, to the best degree that we can, get a competency determination through MCAS. So for as much time as they can have someone to help them regulate and access curriculum, it's most advantageous. We tried to make it work with .6, but it's feeling like it's not working as well as it could.
Okay. Questions?
Motion to approve the .4.
Thank you. Motion by Meg, second.
Second.
Second by Leah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that also carries. Thank you for bringing those forward. That brings us into item F, which is a music department donation. Also you, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay, yes, this one's a lovely one. The English family has donated a trumpet and a clarinet, as well as a whole bunch of music supplies, music stands, those kinds of things, music books. And so because it's a $500 donation, we just need your, valued at $500, we just need the school committee's approval to accept those gifts.
Just for clarification, because in the agenda itself, it says $250. It is definitely the 500 is the.
Each
$250
item
for
is
the
each,
trumpet
okay, yes,
and
thank
$250
you.
for the clarinet.
My adding wasn't so good.
Sorry.
Motion to accept the gifts as read.
Thank you, Joe.
Second.
So motion by Joe, second by Meg. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that carries. I love how many music donations it seems like we have had over the past couple of years. Right, that brings us into item G, which is the robotics final travel approval.
Okay, so what you're seeing here are two that are high school travel requests, and I think at our next meeting, you'll see the same for the middle school. But Mr. Scott is looking for your approval, final approval for the Hopkinton High School robotics trip to Texas, expanding from May 4th to 8th, and that is for the VEX Robotics World Championship, and I think the kids always go and have a really good time and find a lot of success.
So glad they get to go.
This is like the Super Bowl for these kids. I mean, they work so hard. This is
Yeah.
2 years in a row they haven't gone, right?
Yeah.
It's been remote.
This is the team that was in a few months ago, right? The VEX
It was middle
Robotics.
school.
Yeah, those were
Yeah.
the middle school ones.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll see them next
I see.
time. They'll have their final approval sheet in.
So the cost of the program per student, is that paid for by the student? Does the school supplement some of that?
The school does supplement, and they do fundraisers as well. You know, we've always had a practice where if a student was part of a group like this and needed financial aid, and, you know, sometimes we look at that through free and reduced lunch, you know, numbers, we always help them out.
Okay.
I believe, doesn't the high school robotics team run a tournament to raise money for the team? I think they do fundraising of that nature for the other kids as well.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Good question.
I'll make a motion to approve the high school robotics trip to Texas.
Okay, motion by Meg, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joe, all those in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, unanimous, and so carries. And that brings us into the BPA final travel approval.
And you heard the voice of one of our students who talked about this National Leadership Conference. And so Mr. Scott again is looking to take the Business Professionals of America to the National Leader Conference for in Dallas, Texas, also spanning those dates of May 5th to 8th in 2022. So just a couple months away.
A motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion by Meg, a second by Leah, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that also carries, thank you. And that brings us into old business IA, which is policy JBB, educational equity. This is a fifth reading. Dr. Kavanaugh, I know we did have a little bit of feedback that came in. I don't know if you want to.
I think we had two different emails who had come from people. I don't know if you wanted me to read them or just to talk about them. I could do either one.
You can talk about them, summarize in a pithy manner.
I shall. So one of the writers was, I think, a little bit concerned about, you know, some of the language about closing gaps or disproportionality. And it felt like that writer's point was that that's sort of just human nature, you know, that we're always going to find that there are some people who are, you know, faster than each other, taller than each other, smarter than each other, and those things. And to kind of be able to say that there are equitable outcomes doesn't always work. And the second writer was a person who said that, you know, they really had issues with things that said things like grade level, benchmark achievements, closing gaps, because this particular writer, I think, felt like kids should be able to exceed those kinds of benchmarks, I think. I don't know if I'm capturing that as well as I could, so please feel free to jump in, because you probably all read that email as well. This policy has not changed since the last time we looked at it. Last time we talked about it, we did talk about in numbers 1 to 5, really trying to kind of quantify things a little bit, because I think other iterations of it didn't have data in there that was quite as measurable as what you're seeing here. But I think we kind of put it on hold because I don't necessarily know that people felt like they had enough time to really digest all of what it said.
Comments from the policy.
Well, so I think equitable outcomes is a fair benchmark as long as you're thinking about it in terms of sort of across students, right? So, you know, we're not looking to kind of have one student be at a higher level than another. We're looking to see, you know, across a population of students, what is the pattern of all of these different data points, and then looking at other populations of students and making sure that they have similar patterns, right? So if there's some kind of lowering of those kind of numbers within different populations, then that can point towards an issue with something in the, you know, in any number of things. One of the examples that's constantly put out there is, you know, a child immigrates, and then they do a math test, and in the math test it talks about tacos. And the child may never have been exposed to tacos. And so that particular math test then is not actually measuring their ability to do math. It's confusing them by bringing in cultural references that do not allow the child to actually reach the level of success that they would normally reach in a math test because of something that's, you know, as what seems as innocuous as that. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking to kind of look at populations and make sure that populations are comparable within the school.
Thank you for that explanation. Did you want
Just to think about this out loud, so to make sure the populations are comparable, so is the objective to ensure there's equal access to all aspects of the curriculum and life in the classroom and the extracurricular life for all students?
I think access is what we've been aiming for,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think we're taking it a step further and saying we want to see the outcomes coming out of that access being somewhat comparable, right?
Right, right. I have a hard time seeing that, though.
It's one of the things we get from the state, right, is, how many children of demographically are in, SCL, let's say, or how many children compared to, other children, right? Like what populations are seeing like too many children in special needs compared to other populations, and is that really like a true number? Like, do we happen to have some kind of disparity for real, or is there something we're doing to test that then gives us these outcomes that may not be correct, right? So that's what we're looking for, and I think we do a good job of it. So it's mostly just codifying it into policy that this is important.
So I always get tripped up on, and I know this is sort of silly, but I get tripped up on the words, some of the words, because I think of policy as something that should be implementable and sort of measurable and whatever. And so the words that always get me when I look at this, and every time I'm like, oh, I don't know how I would actually know if we're doing this, is when we use fairness and justice. And so I feel like, so this draft says, educational equity is based on the principles of fairness and justice in the allocation of resources. And then I sit back and I think, what does that mean? If I have $100, what does fairness look like in my distribution of that $100? And I guess I just don't know what that means. I mean, I know what in any given moment I can make a personal judgment on that, but I struggle with that particular part of this policy because I don't know truly what that means to the administration that has to adhere to this. Have you guys talked about? I mean, the words are here, so I'm assuming you guys talk. You're very specific about the language that's chosen. So, am I misunderstanding?
I mean, I struggle with the broadness of the language.
Okay,
I really
I
do.
do too. Okay, that's good.
If you gave me my red pen and sent me to my study, but I also don't want to reject the notion because I believe in equal access to all aspects of education, and I hope that our children will all succeed and flourish. And measurements will differ, but I don't know how to codify this.
Right.
I don't.
I think there's an interesting question about, because I initially read this really hoping that all children have equal access. But then I read the language that is here, and I just want to make sure we're actually thinking we're going to deliver what we're saying here. And if you are an overachieving student, will we continually support your growth at the same rate? What does it look like? And I always try to look at these policies through the different lenses of the different kinds of populations that we have in our schools. And sometimes, I don't know, I just get tripped up a lot in the language because it's so, it's aspirational, but I don't know.
I guess because I work at such a high level with data, like I'm hearing a lot of like individual student comparisons, but when you're talking about populations, you're not like some individual students are going to be up here and some are going to be down here, and all you're hoping for is to see a similar pattern, right? So, like for instance, one of the issues that happens a lot, we've been talking gifted and advanced learner. Minority students rarely get into gifted programs. In fact, there was an article recently about a particular school district that actually has managed, kind of these equitable outcomes for the gifted programs for minorities as well, right? And so that kind of thing is what we're looking for. It's not necessarily that, this one student won't be supported in their growth. In fact, we're aiming to hopefully move all the populations up. We're not aiming to move anyone down, right?
Yep.
But the point is that a population, girls versus boys, or certain minorities versus certain other minorities versus Caucasian students, are we seeing the same sort of spread? Do we see the same kind of percentages in the high classes versus in the special education? Do we see the same, level of graduation? Do we see similar grades when they are given that access? So, so we managed to give them access to APs, but are they getting similar grades, right? And if they're not, then that's kind of odd. If you can take an entire population and say the population as a whole seems to be grading lower than this other population at the AP level, which means while they've had access, there might be something holding them back from getting the right results, right? And that's what we're looking for.
I mean, I think we do that, as you say, we do
Right.
that across the board. But, I went to the Massachusetts Association of School Committees website, which I visit with some embarrassing frequency. And they define educational equity. Would you like to hear the definition? It is a K-12 term referring to federal and state policies and requirements. Specifically, the term is closely associated with No Child Left Behind legislation that was led by former President Bush, blah, 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 blah. And so, do we need this additional policy because it's part of the fabric of public education in the state and across the nation? I'm just trying to understand what good is it going to do here in our policy book? What is it going to add to motivate us to measure these data which we're required by law to collect and to compare? Break it down by group.
I mean, one thing I can add, if you don't mind,
Go, please.
is, I don't know the answer to whether or not you need a policy.
Yeah.
I think this is a very value-laden example of a policy, and when I think about the role of the school committee member in terms of budget, and you start to think about, or it's time to think about who we're going to hire, and how do we prioritize, and what are our values, and so if we say, well, we need another social worker in the district because we have X population of students that really needs that type of support, and we have to balance that against other things that we're asking for versus maybe adding another AP course for a different population of students. How do we make those determinations in terms of offering equitable opportunities? And I think sometimes those are the things you grapple with. So I think whether or not you have a policy in place, it does come down to what are the values of the particular school committee in the district.
Right.
So
That's a risk with that, the fairness and justice in the distribution, because I'm not sure I know what that is in advance. We'd have to debate it, I guess, and try to achieve whatever that means, but fairness can mean so many things. I don't know, it's hard. Read again. We can maybe.
I think for me, the piece that is kind of going back and forth is the one piece of if we look at our data and we find that a particular population of students based on any number of things in this policy plus others, if we find that group is significantly underperforming relative to other groups, that for sure signals that we have a problem somewhere. Something is not allowing students who should otherwise, be able to, at a large scale, not, again, to your point, the individual students, but across
Right.
many things.
And that's the difference between results and access, right? A student can maybe
Yeah.
be in the AP class, a student can, be
Right.
in these situations, but they may not be performing as well because of other factors. And so equitable results allows you to really think hard about what factors might be preventing a population of students from doing well in particular situations.
So I like that piece. In terms of the other things, I don't have an answer one way or the other if putting it in the policy. And I guess I would look to those of you who are professionals in the district. If you have thoughts on ways that policy versus other ways that we ensure as a district, and not to throw you on the spot because I did not send this in advance, but
No, it's an okay question. I do think we are constantly looking at data. And some of the data that we look at really is like drilled down to individual kids or, classrooms but some of it is that 30,000 foot kind of data to say, how are our boys doing versus our girls? How are our students of color doing? How are our socioeconomically disadvantaged kids doing? So we do that all the time. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why when we get our density reports, you don't see problems with disproportionality because we're constantly looking at it. And that's not to say that it couldn't happen in a subsequent year, that we might find something. And I think we talked about this a few years ago, that we were looking at some of our kids in ESOL classes and we said, oh, look, they have teachers sort of primarily that are beginning teachers, and that's one of the things DESE frowns upon, giving inexperienced teachers to a particular group of kids who might be strugglers. But when we looked at that, we said, well, that's because our population has grown so quickly that we've had to hire, in a way that so they will grow in experience, but this is what we needed to do at the time. So maybe I've gone a very long way to saying that some of the idealized language in here, I agree. I don't necessarily know that we're going to be able to attain the idealized language, but I think we added the 1 to 5 measurable stuff because that is what we already know we're doing. So that kind of leaves you in a position of, do you feel comfortable with idealized language, or do you feel confident that we will continue to work as a district to measure those things through pretty in-depth data use?
Jesse, did you see this policy at all?
I didn't see it before.
Okay.
My concern with all of these policies, all of them, is as a school committee, the unintended impacts that we would have on the day in the life of a administrator or a staff member. So the job of teacher is not getting easier right, and we're seeing difficulty in some districts attracting teachers.
Yeah.
So again, just speaking generally about all of our policies, I've become very careful, I guess, about over-legislating from our view here.
I think that's something Amanda has said before too. She would like to slim down the policy collection.
I was trained by Jen way back when I joined policy, so I like the policy that we need, but then we have to maintain it and we have to apply it. So I don't want a policy that maybe is redundant to law or already in practice. I mean, I don't know. I like the most of the bullets on the bottom. Maybe I need to sit with. I hate to say that.
Just
Well, I mean, if you'd like us to rework the top, if you're fine with the 5 bullets, which I think are the most important thing, are those 5 numbers, right? So if you're okay, if you'd like us to rework the language at the top, I think that can definitely be done. My personal impetus, like I said, is the population analysis and making sure that by codifying it, it means that, even when I leave or somebody else leaves, it's still considered a priority of the school committee, right? Until such a time as the school committee as a whole decides it's no longer a priority, right? And I think that's part of the reason why codifying it is so important, because that guidance remains, right? If we think it's important enough for it to remain.
You know, hearing you, it makes me think perhaps we could just rephrase this to be a little more focused on, we would like to ensure that the district attends to all of these different sets of data and compares them and through the lens of equity or something.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's all we need and we don't need the prefatory ramble.
Yeah, so we can definitely sit down and rework.
And just from my own understanding, I want to play back to you what I think I heard to see if I'm understanding the goal, because I think I like this. So are you saying that basically if we look across really any aspect of the district, we would, in an ideal world, see a blend of identifiers that reflects the population and is heterogeneous across all everywhere. So anywhere you looked, whether it was in, struggling, maybe with struggling students or with advanced students or with athletes or with musicians or AP students or whatever, we wouldn't be able to predict based on any identifier. So we would see a blend in an ideal state. We would see sort of an equal blend across all aspects and achievement levels.
Yes, in terms of, based on the population percentages,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
And we
what
would
you're saying.
see, but this is a step past, so that's why I keep push, it's a slight step past that, right? So it's not just a blend of them, let's say, being in the classroom, it's also a blend of them getting similar.
Achieving.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's that little step that goes from just access.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right.
So I'm more than comfortable going back and doing the first two paragraphs, as long as we like the number piece, which, like I said, to me, the data analysis and is one of the key pieces.
The number piece is tricky, but I stumble on some of the numbers.
Okay.
I appreciate the vision, but I do stumble on I stumble on the wording.
On some of the wording. Okay, we'll go back and look.
And maybe
That's fine.
because you are a data analyst, you could draft just a short paragraph about what exactly you're looking for.
Okay.
That might be very helpful.
I want to ask a general question about policies to follow on my last comment. What kind of review do we have with, like, building principals and others who would be affected by policies, in a general sense, on all policies?
If it's something that's kind of closely tied to a building or a building principal, we usually alert them to the fact that, this policy is there. Georgette does send them out, obviously, to all the teachers and the principals every single time there's a policy up for review. I mean, I think a good example might be a couple of years ago, we might have been talking about like a field trip policy or something, and the SMLs responded to that one, because it would obviously have impacted something like the BPA that you approved tonight or that kind of stuff. So they're kind of quasi-attentive to it.
I think you had brought Dr. Zaleski into a few policies
Yes.
that we reviewed, and I mean, it seemed like as they come up, I think we reviewed one about the defibrillators or like maintaining them, whatever, and you talked about how that happens, and it seems like for each policy under review, those who are impacted seem to get tapped for.
Absolutely, like
Yeah.
allergies.
Yeah, we had the nurses.
Nursing crew, yeah.
And same with this one, for example. We got that kind of feedback.
I don't necessarily know that the principals really look carefully at this one.
Okay, I'll ask on the others too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. That brings us into IHB, I think is next on the, I don't, without having a, IHB, which is Special Instructional Programs and Accommodations, programs for children with special needs.
Okay. I think the last time you saw this one, we had put into the packet not the one that we wanted to present to you. So this one is it. If you are wondering if people have seen this, I know Dr. Zaleski and the team chairs have read through this. But that was obviously some time ago. It was when we first brought these forward. So this is really, I think, the first time you're seeing this one in this iteration.
And we did have some feedback. Should I read
Oh,
that?
please,
aloud?
yep, that would be great.
A resident wrote and made some good suggestions. The first, that we reconsider using the word mainstream. Other suggestions were to change the phrase regular school program to public school program. And I kind of like that. I think regular, just public school program. And then to put in place of special instruction, the wording specially designed instruction. So it shows it was specifically designed for that individual. And after the wording, accommodations and the support they need, add this wording to make the necessary progress, because this is what the school is supposed to do. It's what we're talking about. Children should also be fully included in the school system's non-academic and extracurricular activities. And then in the last sentence, special education curricular services and programs, she wants us to add the wording that are needed for specially designed instruction to help the child make progress academically, socially, and emotionally. And I will bring this back to our policy committee to
Great,
go
excellent.
through it. But we wanted, because there was the flub up about the version that showed up in the last meeting, and we wanted to make sure you saw the proper mask version that we're working with.
Can somebody give like the overview on, or the impetus level on this one, where it comes from? And
Yeah. So Meg, I think you brought this one forward.
I know, I'm the one, and I wish I'd reviewed it before tonight, Joe, but I've been busy the last few weeks.
just
You know,
speaking very
I've had
generally,
other occupations, so I do have a lot to say about it, but I don't have a lot to say about it right now.
No, okay, that's fine.
So-
You know, I was thinking, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with a resident in general about some special ed concerns over the past couple weeks, and it prompted me to want to suggest here that we have like the CPAC organization in, who we had that wonderful new leader of that organization
Jen
here in
Halliday,
August,
yes.
yeah. And I think we should do that regularly, and
Yeah.
especially when we have a policy like this. I would hate for the five of us to try to figure this out on our own, and get some input from CPAC too.
I think,
That's excellent.
yeah, I think one of the because we discussed this a little bit last time, and there was a question of, since this is all codified into law, why would we have it in policy? And I just want to bring up again the discussion we were having, which is this can be placed as an umbrella policy. There's a lot of policies that then fall below it. MASC has like a English learner policy that has like specifics about communication and things like that. And there's other sub policies that fall under this umbrella. So this would be creating the umbrella that, then we have these like kind of more specific targeted things under.
I did go back and look at the ones that come under the umbrella on MASC. Some of them I thought were pretty sort of generic. Like there are a couple that were like, okay, well, I think we do this already, but I guess I could see where there might be a need.
I do want to say one thing though. Just because we do it now doesn't mean that we'll always do it, right? And so one of the things that when I look at a policy I think about is, if this entire group turns around and we haven't put it in here, and another group of people come in, they may have other things that they emphasize. It's not that they're anti this, but they may have other things that they emphasize, and if this isn't in policy, then it gets lost, right? So if something's important to us, codifying it allows it to remain important, right? And so, and Dr. Kavanaugh obviously is doing an amazing job with all this, but once again, hopefully she stays with us forever. but there's no guarantee ever with a really good employee that they will remain your employee forever. And so if a new superintendent comes in, once again, having it in policy helps to make sure that the new superintendent or the new whoever aligns well with the needs of the committee. So that's how I view policy. So it's not so much, are we doing it, therefore maybe we shouldn't codify it, but it's more, we should codify it to make sure that we continue to do it.
My only thing is I think this is codified in law.
Yeah,
And this
yeah.
particular
No,
one,
this
there's a law.
particular
Like,
one,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
That's right.
the
And they
piece
have
in
to
this
do-
one that I definitely struggle with, so if you're taking it back, maybe you can consider this. I may be the only one, but I'd like to understand, like, first of all, what of this is, and maybe Dr. Kavanaugh, you're the one to say, like, what is in here that is not legally required already? So we don't have to answer that now, but I'd like to understand if you guys want us to add something specific to this district, if you could just highlight that, and then when you come back. But the wording that really kind of trips me up is the third paragraph that starts out, the school committee believes that most children with special needs can be educated in the regular school program if they are given, it goes on. And the concern I have there is that I don't exactly know that it matters what I believe should happen for the education of these students. What I believe is that they should have full access to the education, that they should have whatever they need to be successful, but I think we hire people who are able to determine the best venue. And for me, to put school committee believes as a directive, it makes me uncomfortable because I'm not trained. I don't know where best to educate kids. So that little piece, to me, feels uncomfortable. Like, I'd rather leave that, how students are educated, I'd like to leave to the staff. I'd like to make sure, if we're gonna, underscore any aspect of law, that it is least, that is maximally inclusive, or, that we do that within the needs, while meeting the needs of the child. And I just don't know what those environments look like. So if we could just consider the role of school committee when you guys review it and make sure that it's comfortable for you.
And really, under the law, that would be a team decision.
Okay.
You know, where a child is educated. So you're right, there is a philosophical piece there that says the school committee believes.
And I remember when you made that comment before, and so I went and I looked through a lot of our policies, and quite a few of them say the school committee believes. So I thought we're going to have to go back into more, because if that's a difficulty you have, then we really need to go back and remove that from it, because if we're not supposed to state such beliefs. It's not just this policy that contains it.
Well, it depends what the belief is. Like, if the belief is that, maybe in the first, I mean, this specific sentence is saying that I believe in a specific how these children should be educated. Not that they should be educated, or that it should be inclusive, or that there should be equal access to extracurriculars, or, all of those things I believe. But this is saying, it felt to me when I read it, and I'll read it again, maybe I reacted.
To me, what I was thinking of when I read that is sort of just the doctrine of the least restrictive environment, which would be
Right. That's
by law where we have to be
Correct.
placing kids in the least restrictive environment, which would be in the public schools itself.
And I'm very comfortable saying that the school committee fully supports that children be placed in the least restrictive environment. That I'm comfortable with. I mean, obviously, that's our goal. I don't know why. Again, it's just the wording, and 9 times out of 10, people don't read this and it doesn't matter, but when it does matter, it really matters. So that's the thing.
Yeah, I would counter a little there, though, through the chair. It's not whether people read it. It's again, I'll go back to the same question as I had in general on all these policies, is what unintended impacts are we creating by doing these compared with the value we're creating beyond the law that already exists. And I would love to hear again from people who actually have to, our staff has to read these. Technically, they will, and it will have budget impacts. It will have impacts on how their day is executed. It will have impacts that could involve trade-offs. So again, speaking generally about all the policies, that's the same set of concerns I have. I support the idea of both policies we reviewed tonight, but it's the unintended impacts of our goodwill that I wonder about. And I would like to get specific feedback from the people who are going to have to implement these.
So can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Because we have had a lot of good discussion on this, to put this back, sorry, once again, to the policy committee with this, but also to have, and I would say this would be true of both policies, to have some feedback on specifically if there are unintended consequences that were.
And I want to say something, that after so many times putting off these things, it's great to have this much discussion and back and forth and thought on these. Like, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would add in general too, it's been a very busy time till now, and I think we're now starting to refocus on these policies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll
Thank
take
you.
a
Yes.
close
Real
read.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Yes.
agree.
Good work, yeah.
Thank you. So that brings us down to the security camera in schools. The lettering on that is not directly in front of me.
ECAF.
Thank you. ECAF.
So this is a policy we've looked at it once. This one did come from one of the building principals who said, do we have a policy on security cameras in school? Because they're starting to use them with much more frequency. And we recognized that we didn't, but MASC does, and several districts do have them, and several districts do not. And I think that we felt as though if we were going to be using them, especially for disciplinary kinds of reasons, or, for investigations, it felt more genuine to disclose this to parents through policy, as opposed to just, continuing to use our security cameras in that way. I don't necessarily know that all parents know that we have them or that we're using them, but I feel like this is a way to say that these are sort of the ground rules. We do have them and we are using them, which is why you see this policy here tonight.
I didn't see any emails on this, did we?
I did
get
not
any?
see anybody else.
So I've got the same general questions, so I won't repeat them, but there would definitely be big cost impacts. The fact that we're using security cameras today, it sounds like we're using it selectively, or the principal saw that they're being used and wanted to maybe raise concern. I would like for us as a district to have a discussion about whether we want to be increasingly using them. It's interesting that the principal reached out. I don't know, you don't have to say which school, but that I think you said that they're noticing they're being used more, and do we have a policy? So parents maybe would want to know. I'm not sure I'm in favor of them increasingly being used, and I would hate for us to create a set of justifications to that fact that we're increasingly using them, rather than stop and inspect what are we doing here.
Yeah, so I can
Yeah.
give you a couple of examples of how we're using them. I don't think that, I know for sure that we don't have building principals who are sitting and monitoring
Right.
hallways all day long. But in the event that someone says, gosh, something was stolen out of my locker, and we say, well, when was the last time you saw it? Well, I put it in my locker at 11 o'clock, and when I went back at 1, it wasn't there. So you can monitor one of those cameras for 2 hours and go and see if somebody else may have opened that locker or didn't. Or if someone says, I was standing at my locker and, someone called me a name, and we can go and look at that and see, which group of kids, were there 5 kids, 10 kids, 15 kids who walked past, and then we can kind of narrow it down to when did that person turn their head and who was standing next to that student when it happened. So those are kinds of the ways that we are looking at this, the use of these cameras right now. But, certainly we will use them if we feel like it's going to get someone's, belongings back to them, or, that was, part of the reason why we started to put them in the first place, I think, many, many years ago now.
It's also been used, we've had vandalism outside on the fields, cars that have driven out onto the grass fields and,
Protecting our assets.
did significant damage. So, it was used for investigations around that
Yeah.
as well, so.
I think I could understand the outdoor use more. I think that many in the community might question the financial impact of widespread use of cameras to solve minor losses of personal value items,
So- Just a clarification on that, we're not looking to put more cameras in.
We already have them.
But if we have a policy now that
Yeah.
then it opens the doors, I believe.
How so? Can you say
Yeah,
more
yeah.
about that?
Well, I don't, well, these other policies we're just reviewing, we're putting them in place so that we can advance that direction, right? So same with this one. If you have a policy on cameras, that we need them for these reasons, I believe it opens the door a little more. I think it's worthy of a bigger community discussion. I would like to see lots more data on the costs, the impact of the budget if we do continue to advance. Again, remember the context was that the building principal noticed they're increasingly being used. So we want to have some kind of policy to, I would presume, maybe given that context, to regulate their use.
That's not what this policy says, though, I
Yeah,
don't think.
it doesn't, you're right.
I guess,
That's right, that's part of the problem.
Okay.
This policy says a lot about protecting the assets, and the example that Director of Finance gave is a great one. But if you look at it, the other examples in school don't quite map to protection of assets in the school.
I guess, go ahead, I don't want to.
Yeah, if I may, so, one of the things in here that tells you too is that law enforcement and emergency response officials should be granted access to video recordings or the security system after giving prior notice. But we've also had conversations with fire and police that in the event of an extreme emergency and they have to act in real time, they can have access to those cameras then, so that they're not, pulling up to the school and saying, well, where's the problem? They would know that before they actually left the police station. So in some sense, it's not just about, retrieving someone's lost belongings, but I think that there's a safety and security piece as well in this. And I think that was a lot of the reason why we started this so many more years ago. I mean, I think Dr. McLeod it was in like the incipient years of her superintendency that this started to come about.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I think that, I know it's an early reading of this, so there's a lot of tightening up of the language I think could be achieved. One alarming thing for me was cameras could be used to ensure adherence to school committee policies. And to me, I hate to be viewed as some kind of board that requires totalitarian monitoring to make sure they comply with our policies. Of course, I think that we're talking about specific cases, but I just think it needs to be tightened up quite a bit.
So very specific policies, maybe.
I'd like to regulate the
these
example,
particular
the example the
policies.
superintendent gave about fire and police.
Right.
Those could be put into a policy in a way that restricts and regulates the use and the access to that data by law enforcement, only to law enforcement, for example, rather than it to be used as a convenience, where other less invasive means may be available to resolve other issues. I would like us to take the least invasive approach to resolving issues and conflicts in the school, rather than let cameras, because they're so convenient, be the first go-to. And I didn't see anything in the policy on
Well, I
that.
wouldn't want you to think they're the first go-to, because they're not.
No,
mean,
I wouldn't, but the policy, I'm just saying, the wording of the policy, that's all.
Does it say that in here?
No, it
Oh.
doesn't say it doesn't have to be, though.
No, and I really do think that, if we start to conduct an investigation and one kid says this and another kid says that, at some point, the one piece of data that you have that shows the truth is that footage, right? So it does get helpful that way. And we've been using these cameras for years and years, and I think that the only reason we brought this forward is that we thought that this was more transparent with families, to say that we are using them.
So, Joe, can I just reword what I think I'm hearing? Is so are you saying, like, for instance, you would like to see, like, all other methods of trying to resolve a conflict, that the school can take on, like having the students talk, etc., will be utilized before camera footage is looked at. Or I'm not saying that's going to be the wording in the policy, but kind of that thought process of we'll use other conflict resolution means and other ways to try to get at this before we move into something like using the camera.
Yeah, I think a lot of people aren't comfortable with the widespread use of security cameras, where other less invasive methods may be as effective. So, yeah. I just coming from the technology industry too, I just know there's such a push to sell this stuff. And I'm concerned about the expense to the district versus the value gained. So I'd like to see some cost benefit on that too.
I would guess the one thing that I wouldn't want to lose here is the protection of our students from outside and internal threats.
Absolutely,
And that
yes,
I would
yeah.
not want to see the security cameras removed, and I think if we have them, we need to be transparent in the fact that we're using them, both for deterrence and for transparency, and maybe there are ways that we can look to tighten the wording on it.
That's
and
it.
to-
Yeah, I would probably agree with what you say, but as I read it, as it's written, it doesn't quite say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Brings us- right. It is nice to have them be at a point where we can debate some of these
Right.
deeper level things, so
Very good.
appreciate
Yes.
that.
Yes.
That then brings us down to future agenda items.
Again, I would love to have CPAC in here
Yep,
sometime in the next couple
yep.
months. Okay.
I actually hate to say this, but if there's a policy that I was hoping that we could look at, and I guess by we I mean you guys. MASC has a building policy, like the physical building use policy, or not use, but it speaks to the design and construction of buildings and what we may want or not want. And I'm just wondering if we might want to look at having such a policy, because we have a lot of building that will happen. I know that we do a lot with environmental, things like environmental values, or if there are values like that that we want to have considered as we move forward with construction. We're on the cusp of quite a bit of construction in the next 10 years, probably.
Is there a specific
There is, I
MASC?
think it's FC. I'm like doing this from memory. I'll
Can
go.
Can I push back on that just a little bit?
Please.
Before we start doing policy work, it sounds like this is a discussion with the school people, a discussion between all of us, a discussion with maybe ESBC, and then we gather the data. Like once we have all that information to say, okay, this is what we value and this is what our policy will be shaped on. Because I don't want to speak for Meg, but I don't think we have that knowledge. And so I don't think we could look at that policy and make an informed decision that would cover the needs of the school.
It's FA. You gave it the wrong order, sorry. Yes, I agree. That's why it's a future agenda item. I think.
Discussion, and I would think maybe inclusive of that would be to kind of look at where we want to get the data points for what drives the stuff. Okay. That brings us to items by consensus.
Okay. As superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
Motion?
So moved.
Motion by Meg,
Second.
second by Joe. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that, any opposed? Passes. And that then moves us down to a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Meg. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joe. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that adjourns us at 8:34. Thank you all.
Good
And
timing.
I appreciate the early start
I
tonight.
like starting earlier.
Yeah.
Can we
I
do
didn't
that?
mind.
As long as we don't have.